Deep in the shadows of the jungle, he wandered through a maze of towering trees whose trunks were thick and gnarled and whose roots twisted like serpents across the damp forest floor. Every step he took was cushioned by layers of fallen leaves and moss that smelled of earth and rain. The air was heavy with humidity, and the scent of blooming flowers and rotting vegetation mingled together as if the jungle itself was breathing around him. He moved carefully, avoiding the low-hanging branches and the creeping vines that seemed to reach out with hidden intent. He had been exploring for days, searching for something he could not name, driven by a feeling deep inside that whispered of discovery and change. A rustle in the underbrush made him freeze. His heart thumped in his chest, and his eyes scanned the darkness beyond the flickering sunlight that filtered through the canopy. There was a sudden stillness that pressed against him, and in that silence he noticed it a small mound of leaves piled strangely and unnaturally, as if someone or something had arranged them. He crouched low, examining the pile with caution, his instincts warning him and curiosity pushing him forward. His fingers parted the damp leaves, revealing a smooth surface that glimmered faintly in the shadows. He reached out and touched it gently, and the sensation sent a shiver through his body. The object was warm and alive, pulsing with a quiet energy that seemed to resonate with the very air around. I'd realized it was an egg, unlike any he had ever seen. Its shell was a patchwork of colors, shifting subtly like the skin of a chameleon, blending into its surroundings. Its surface was faintly translucent, and he could see movement inside, a flicker of shadow that hinted at life waiting patiently for the right moment to emerge. His breath caught as he imagined the creature that might be inside, small, fragile, and innocent, yet filled with the promise of something extraordinary. He could not explain why he felt a surge of protectiveness toward this tiny being, why a strange connection seemed to thread itself between them. He knew in that instant that he could not leave it there, exposed to the dangers of the jungle or the hands of hunters who might stumble across. Gently lifted the egg and held it close against Phyllis's chest, feeling the warmth and the rhythmic pulse that seemed to match his own heartbeat. He moved carefully through the undergrowth, carrying it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Every step was measured, every sound avoided, as if the forest itself would recognize the life he was cradling and reward him with silence. The sunlight shifted as he climbed a small hill, and a shaft of light caught the egg, making it glow softly in his arms. It was a sign he could not interpret, but it filled him with awe and a sense of destiny. He knew his life was about to change in ways he could not yet understand, that the jungle had given him a gift, and that whatever emerged from this egg would alter everything forever. Hours passed as he searched for a safe place, a hidden nook where the egg could be nurtured away from prying eyes and lurking predators. His mind raced with possibilities, imagining the first fragile cries of a newborn creature, the warmth of its tiny body, and the bond that would form between them. He felt both fear and excitement coursing through him, knowing that he was stepping into a story larger than himself, a story that would test him and shape him, and perhaps reveal secrets of the jungle that had been hidden for centuries. At last, he found a sheltered hollow beneath the roots of an ancient tree, a place shielded from rain and sun and hidden from wandering eyes. He placed the egg gently on a bed of soft moss and ferns, feeling a reverent hush fall over him, as if the jungle itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. He sat back on his heels and watched the egg pulse, faintly glowing in the dim light, convinced that life was stirring inside and that the moment of change was closer than ever. Days passed, and he returned to the hollow with a careful excitement that made his heart race. Each time he approached the mossy roots, the egg remained warm and pulsing, as if it had its own heartbeat, and he felt a strange comfort in its quiet presence. He watched it for hours, tracing the faint patterns on its surface, wondering what kind of creature lay within and imagining the moment it would break free. Then one morning the world shifted. The air seemed to shimmer around the hollow, and he noticed a thin crack running along the shell. The crack widened imperceptibly, and a tiny sound reached his ears, a soft, almost imperceptible chirp that made his breath catch in his throat. He crouched closer, his eyes wide and hands trembling with anticipation, as a small, fragile creature began to emerge from the shell. Its limbs were weak and trembling, its skin soft and glistening with a sheen of moisture that reflected the filtered sunlight. The eyes were large and luminescent, filled with an intelligence that seemed far beyond its size. He extended a hand cautiously, and the creature reached toward him with a tiny claw, as if recognizing him instantly and trusting him without question. He felt a surge of wonder and awe unlike anything he had experienced before, and a warmth that filled his chest. He whispered softly to it in the language of the jungle the same words he had muttered to the egg in the days before, and it seemed to respond to the sound, curling closer to him with a delicate shiver of life. The creature was so small and fragile that he feared any movement might harm it, yet it moved with a grace that belied its weakness, stretching and twisting its body like a miniature predator in training, already sensing the world around it. Its tiny tail flicked back and forth, and its claws flexed as though testing the boundaries of its own strength. He felt both amazement and fear as he realized that this small being carried within it a potential that could be both beautiful and terrifying. He carried it carefully back to his dwelling, a hidden nook beneath the roots of a massive tree, and made a soft bed of leaves and moss for it to rest. The creature curled up against him, instantly seeking warmth and comfort. He watched over it with a fierce protectiveness, feeding it droplets of water and tiny insects and marveling at how quickly it adapted to his presence. The bond between them grew stronger each moment, as if the creature could sense that he had saved it, and that together they would face whatever the jungle had in store. Nights were filled with the soft rustle of the forest, and the tiny creature, learning to respond to every sound, every movement it made, was an exploration of the world, and he observed it with a fascination that grew into an obsession. Each blink of its luminous eyes and each flick of its tail told him that the tiny being was extraordinary in ways he could not yet comprehend. By the time the first week passed, he realized that the creature was no longer simply fragile. It carried within it an energy and a cunning that hinted at the predator it would become. His mind raced with both excitement and caution, knowing that this small miracle was the beginning of something far greater than either of them could yet imagine. As the days turned into weeks, he found himself unable to leave the creature even for a moment. Its presence had become a pulse in his life, a constant rhythm that he could not ignore. Every movement it made, every blink of its luminous eyes drew dim deeper into a bond that was both thrilling and terrifying. The jungle around him seemed to fade when he was near it, and the world narrowed to the warmth and life of the tiny predator in his care. He watched it explore its surroundings with a cautious curiosity, testing the boundaries of its small territory and learning the sounds and smells of the forest. Its claws scraped gently against bark and leaves as it practiced its balance and coordination. He whispered to it, often telling it stories of the jungle, of creatures and dangers that lay beyond the hollow of its safe haven, and it seemed to listen, its eyes reflecting a keen intelligence that made him shiver. He carried the creature with him everywhere, moving silently through the undergrowth and teaching it to recognize the sounds of other animals. The tiniest rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, the distant roar of predators, all became lessons in survival. Its small body twitched with excitement at each new discovery, and he felt pride mingled with fear at the sharpness of its instincts. He realized that the bond they shared was no ordinary connection. It was a weaving of trust and power that tied them together in a way that could not be broken. At night he would sit beside it in the hollow, the moonlight filtering through the canopy and illuminating the delicate patterns on its skin. He would stroke its head and feel the pulse of life beneath his fingertips. It responded to his touch, curling against him and pressing its warmth into his chest as if claiming him as its own. The sensation was intoxicating, and he knew that he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The creature was no longer merely a tiny being, it was a part of him, and a part of it, and the thought filled him with both joy and dread. The jungle around them seemed to recognize the bond too. The animals that had once skirted around him now paused in their paths, observing the tiny predator with cautious respect. Birds would call in warning, and the leaves would rustle under unseen paws, as if the forest itself acknowledged that something extraordinary had been born in the hidden hollow. He felt a thrill of power mixed with unease, knowing that the creature he nurtured was evolving faster than he had anticipated. He began to teach it more deliberately, using sounds, gestures, and subtle movements to communicate commands. It learned quickly, mimicking his actions and responding with an uncanny understanding of intention. He realized that the tiny creature would soon be more than a companion. It would be a force of nature capable of hunting, protecting, and obeying in ways that were frighteningly precise. Yet, even as he reveled in their growing connection, a shadow of doubt crept into his mind. He knew that the jungle held dangers beyond his control, and that the creature he loved so fiercely could become uncontrollable if not guided with care. The bond between them was unbreakable, but it was also a thread stretched thin over a chasm of unknown possibilities, and he wondered if he was ready for the consequences that were bound to come. Every heartbeat of the creature echoed in his chest, every flick of its tail and twitch of its ears tied them together more tightly, and he understood that life as he had known it was gone, replaced by a new existence, where trust, cunning, and instinct would decide their fate in the jungle. They called home. The jungle was alive with sound and scent as he moved through the undergrowth, carrying the tiny predator carefully in his arms. Every rustle of leaves, every distant call of a bird was a signal to be alert, and he could feel the creature's tiny body tense against his chest as if it knew instinctively that something was about to happen. He had watched it grow stronger and sharper in every way, but until now it had only practiced and explored, never truly tested against the wild around them. They came upon a clearing bathed in dappled sunlight where a small deer had wandered, unaware of the shadow that lurked nearby. He lowered the creature to the ground on a patch of moss hidden by ferns and watched as its eyes followed every movement of the deer. Its small body crouched low, muscles coiled like springs, and he could see the faint tremor of anticipation ripple through it. He whispered softly to calm it, and then released the silent command that he had taught it. Over weeks of careful training, the predator moved like liquid, slipping through the gaps in the foliage, its tiny claws making no sound on the forest floor. It darted closer and closer, its eyes locked on the deer's legs, and he felt a thrill of fear and awe at the precision and patience it displayed. Each step was deliberate, each movement a perfect combination of instinct and the lessons he had taught it. The deer lifted its head and flicked its ears nervously, but it did not notice the small shadow waiting to strike. In a sudden blur, the creature lunged its tiny body, propelled by a power that seemed impossible. Its claws struck the deer with unerring accuracy, cutting and tearing with precision. The animal stumbled and fell, its eyes wide with panic, and then the predator moved again, keeping it trapped and unsure of escape. The man felt a shiver of exhilaration run through him and a knot of guilt twist in his stomach as he realized what they had done together, what they were capable of together. The predator returned to his side, its body vibrating with energy and its eyes glinting with intelligence and triumph. It nuzzled against him as if sharing the victory, and he felt a mix of pride, fear, and awe that made his pulse race. The tiny creature was no longer simply a dependent being, it was a hunter, a force in the jungle that obeyed and trusted him completely, yet carried a power that was both thrilling and terrifying. He knelt beside the fallen deer and touched the creature's head, feeling the pulse of life and the warmth of its fur. His mind raced, imagining what it would become in months and years to come. The jungle seemed to hum around them, acknowledging the change, acknowledging the predator that had been born from a fragile egg and nurtured with care. Every rustle and chirp seemed amplified, as if the forest itself recognized that a new force had emerged that could not be ignored. As they moved back through the undergrowth, the predator at his side, he realized the bond between them had deepened in ways he could not have anticipated. They had shared their first victory, and it had forged a connection that was unbreakable and frightening. He understood that the jungle would no longer be a simple home for them. It would be a stage for a power that was growing with every heartbeat, every step, and every choice they made together. By nightfall, they returned to the hollow, the moonlight glinting off the predator's eyes, and he sat beside it, knowing that everything had changed and that the creature he loved was now a hunter capable of more than he had ever imagined. The jungle had grown quieter in the days following the first hunt, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath, awaiting the next move. He moved cautiously through the undergrowth with the predator at his side, its small body alert and eyes gleaming with a predatory intelligence. The air was heavy with the scent of rain and earth and distant smoke curling up from somewhere far beyond the dense canopy. He had sensed it before, a tension in the wind, a ripple of unease that he could not yet name, but that made his muscles coil with anticipation. Word reached him through hushed whispers carried on the wind from traveling traders and hidden scouts that the tribal princess was moving through the lands beyond the jungle. Her armies were gathering, and the villagers spoke of her growing ambition and the ruthless cunning with which she ruled. Every word that reached his ears sent a thrill of fear through him and a spark of determination. He knew that she would come eventually, and that her eyes would be drawn to the heart of the jungle, to the place where he had hidden the tiny predator that had become more than a companion. It had become a weapon, He crouched in the shadows, watching the movement of leaves and the flight of birds, imagining the princess and her warriors marching through the undergrowth, unaware of the eyes that followed them unseen and silent. The jungle seemed to respond to his thoughts, twisting and bending to create paths and barriers that only he could read. The predator moved beside him, sensing the change in the air, its claws flexing and tail flicking in silent anticipation of the challenges to come at night. The sounds of drums echoed faintly through the distance, carried by the wind, and he could hear the chants of warriors preparing for conquest. The predator nestled close against him, its small body warm and vibrating with energy. He whispered to it softly, recounting the tales of hunts past and the lessons it had learned. Could feel the creature responding to his voice, learning and remembering and preparing for what was to come in the days ahead. The whispers of the jungle carried more than just the noise of distant armies. They carried warnings, the rustle of leaves that spoke of movement unseen, the subtle shifts and shadows that hinted at intruders. He realized that the world beyond the hollow was changing, and that soon nothing would remain simple or safe. The predator had grown powerful enough to strike fear into any creature it encountered, yet it remained obedient to him, and he understood that the bond they shared was the only safeguard against chaos. He began to plan each step, carefully mapping the paths through the jungle, memorizing the places where ambushes could be set and where the predator could strike with maximum effect. He envisioned the moment when the princess would step into the clearing, the instant her eyes would widen in shock, and the way the predator would move with precision and speed beyond anything she had ever imagined. Every heartbeat of the predator seemed to echo the urgency of the approaching conflict, and he felt a mixture of exhilaration and dread, knowing that soon the quiet of the jungle would be shattered. By war, the whispers carried on the wind were no longer just rumors, they were a call to action, and he understood that he and the predator were at the center of a storm that could not be avoided or ignored. By dawn, he crouched in the shadows, watching the sun rise through the canopy, the golden light casting long slanted beams across the forest floor. He touched the predator lightly on its head and felt the pulse of life and loyalty, and knew that the jungle had chosen him and the tiny predator to face the coming challenge, and that nothing would ever be the same again. The jungle seemed to bend around him as he moved silently through the undergrowth, carrying the predator in his arms, every step deliberate, every sound measured. He had spent days observing the lands beyond the hollow, mapping paths and clearing hiding spots, learning the rhythms of the forests and the patterns of movement that would give him an advantage over any intruder. The predator curled against his chest, its small body tense and alert, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light of dawn, as if sensing the gravity of the plan that was forming in his mind. He crouched behind a thick cluster of ferns, overlooking a narrow path where the sun pierced through the canopy. In scattered shafts, he imagined the princess and her warriors moving along the path, unaware of the silent danger that awaited them. He whispered softly to the predator, outlining the steps of the plan in tones that only it could understand, and it responded with tiny shifts and flicks of its tail, as if committing each detail to memory. Every night he had studied the predator, training it to move without sound, to strike without warning, and to think beyond instinct. He had taught it to recognize signals, subtle gestures, and sounds that would allow it to act with precision and efficiency. It had learned quickly, picking up on patterns and responding with a cunning that both thrilled and terrified him. He realized that together they had become a force capable of turning the tide of any encounter in the jungle. He moved through the shadows, marking spots where the undergrowth was thick enough to conceal their approach, and where the predator could strike with speed and force. He imagined the moment when the first branch would snap under the weight of a warrior and the predator would pounce unseen and unstoppable. He could feel the thrill of anticipation coursing through him and through the tiny predator that pressed against him, its muscles coiled and ready for action. He thought of the princess and the pride that had brought her to the edge of his jungle. She was clever and ruthless and would not hesitate to destroy anything in her path. The plan had to be flawless, precise, and executed with timing beyond human comprehension. Every scenario was rehearsed in his mind, every possible reaction anticipated and countered by the instincts of the predator and the cunning that he had nurtured. In it. As night fell, he positioned the predator in a hidden alcove beneath the roots of an ancient tree, its eyes glinting in the darkness as it watched the clearing ahead. He whispered once more the silent commands and felt the creature shift in understanding. It was ready, its senses attuned to every subtle movement, every sound, every change in the air. He knew that the jungle itself seemed to conspire with them, guiding their path, providing concealment and opportunity. The moon rose high and silver light spilled across the forest floor, illuminating the plan in sharp relief. He touched the predator's head, feeling the pulse of life and the surge of anticipation. He understood that the coming encounter would test them both, that every decision, every heartbeat would matter, and that failure was not an option. The shadow plan was set, and all that remained was the waiting and the quiet preparation as the jungle held its breath and the predator lay, poised, ready to strike at the signal of its master. The jungle was alive with the sound of leaves rustling under the weight of movement and the distant cries of birds disturbed by footsteps. He crouched low behind a thick wall of vines, the predator at his side, its small body coiled like a spring, ready to explode at a single signal. Every sense was alert, his eyes scanning the undergrowth for the slightest shift, every muscle tensed in anticipation. He could feel the pulse of the predator against his chest and knew that it shared his awareness of the approaching presence. Through the filtered sunlight, he saw them first, a flash of color. The bright garments of warriors, moving cautiously along a narrow path. Their spears glinted in the sunlight, and the sound of their chatter drifted faintly on the air. They were unaware of the silent eyes that watched them from the shadows, and he felt a thrill of both fear and power, knowing that the predator would strike before they even sensed danger. The princess rode at the front, her posture straight and commanding, her eyes sharp, scanning the jungle with confidence and authority. She exuded a presence that demanded attention and respect. And he knew that she was as clever and ruthless as the stories had said, yet in this moment she was unaware that the jungle itself had turned against her, and that a force smaller and more cunning than any human could wield lay waiting unseen. He signaled the predator with a subtle gesture, and it slipped from his grasp, moving through the undergrowth with a grace and silence that seemed impossible. Its luminous eyes followed the movements of the warriors, each step calculated, each pause deliberate as it closed the distance with unerring precision. The predator was a shadow blending perfectly with the patterns of light and leaf, a silent nightmare that would strike before recognition could occur. A twig snapped beneath the foot of a warrior, and the predator lunged with a speed that left no time for reaction. Its claws struck with lethal accuracy, and the warrior cried out as he fell to the ground. The other warriors froze in shock, the princess turning her head in alarm. Her eyes widened at the sight of the creature moving impossibly fast between trees, striking without warning. She reached for her spear, but the predator was already gone, disappearing into the foliage, leaving confusion and fear in its wake. He stayed hidden, watching the chaos unfold, the predator responding to his gestures and signals, moving strategically, ensuring that the princess could not easily escape. The warriors tried to regroup, calling to each other, but their voices were swallowed by the jungle and the predator's relentless precision. Each second the tension grew, the air thick with the metallic scent of fear and the charged electricity of imminent danger. The princess realized too late that she had underestimated the jungle, underestimated the tiny predator, and underestimated the man who had nurtured it. She backed toward a clearing, her eyes scanning desperately for a path of escape, but the predator anticipated her movements, cutting off every angle and every possibility. The jungle itself seemed to close around her, trees and vines forming barriers that guided her into the trap that had been set. He felt a surge of triumph and fear at once, knowing that the encounter had begun exactly as he had planned, yet aware that the balance between control and chaos was delicate and could shift. In an instant the predator's eyes glinted in the shadows, watching every move, every hesitation, as the princess found herself trapped at last in a web she had never imagined. The clearing was bathed in dappled sunlight, yet it felt like a cage as the princess realized the predator had anticipated every step, every movement, and every attempt at escape. Her breath came fast and shallow, her heart pounding in her chest as the jungle itself seemed to close in around her. She raised her spear, hoping to keep the creature at bay, but even in the moment of fear she could see the intelligence in its eyes, the cunning that mirrored its master's intent. The predator moved like a shadow, slipping over roots and through undergrowth, its claws silent, its gaze locked on her. Every twitch and hesitation accounted for. She took a step backward, but the ground was uneven, roots twisted and branches blocked the path behind her. She spun to find another escape, and the predator was already there, cutting off her retreat again and again. Each time she thought she had found a way, the creature anticipated her movements, responding with a speed and precision that left no opening. The warriors who had accompanied her tried to intervene, but the predator was faster than any human could be. Its small body, agile and lethal, each strike forced them to retreat, their confidence melting away as the creature toyed with them, circling in and out of sight, striking and disappearing, leaving them confused and terrified. The jungle echoed with shouts and cries, but none could reach her in time or provide relief. She glanced around, desperate, searching for any sign of an ally or an opening, but the jungle was unforgiving, the thick foliage and twisted routes offering no help. Only the predator and its master knew the paths, the hiding spots, and the perfect timing to strike. She realized that she had underestimated the man who had nurtured it, underestimated his cunning and the loyalty he had instilled in the creature. The predator approached slowly, eyes glinting with predatory intelligence, watching her reactions, gauging her fear and hesitation. Its movements were deliberate, careful, precise, as if it understood that this was the final moment before total domination. She could feel the weight of inevitability pressing down on her, every instinct screaming to flee, but every escape route had been cut off by the predator's cunning and its master's meticulous planning. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, sweat running down her face as she backed toward a narrow space between two ancient trees. The predator followed effortlessly, every step calculated, every angle anticipated. The jungle seemed to conspire with them, the shadows stretching long and the leaves rustling just enough to mask the approach of a creature she could not fight and could not outrun. In a final burst of desperation, she lunged toward a fallen log, hoping for even a fleeting chance of freedom. The predator anticipated the move, leaping with impossible speed and cutting her off completely, leaving her cornered, trapped, and entirely at their mercy. She froze, eyes wide, feeling the presence of inevitability and the realization that there was no escape from the bond of hunter and master that had been forged in the depths of the jungle. The silence that followed was heavy, the predator watching her every movement, its loyalty to its master absolute, and the princess finally understood that she had become part of a story that she could not rewrite. The jungle held its breath, the wind whispered through the leaves, and the predator's eyes glimmered with the promise of power that she could not resist nor escape. The clearing was quiet now, the echoes of struggle fading into the rustle of leaves and the distant cries of the jungle. The princess stood frozen, her spear lowered, her breathing heavy as she faced the predator, its luminous eyes fixed on her with a loyalty that belonged entirely to its master. She felt the weight of inevitability pressing down on her brow, and the realization that the jungle had shifted its power toward forces she could not control. He stepped from the shadows, his presence calm and commanding, the predator moving at his side like a shadow incarnate. Every movement was deliberate, every step measured and confident. He surveyed the scene with eyes that had seen the growth of the tiny creature he had nurtured and the intelligence and cunning it had acquired under his care. The jungle seemed to part for him, acknowledging the bond between hunter and master and the shift in balance that had taken place. The princess tried to meet his gaze, her own filled with defiance and fear. But she knew that resistance was futile. The predator had cut off every path of escape, had tested her strength, her speed, and her wits, and had found them wanting. She understood now that power was not simply in armies or weapons, but in the unseen force that had been cultivated in the hidden depths of the jungle. The predator moved closer, circling with a silent precision that made her pulse quicken. Every twitch of its tail, every flex of its claws was a reminder of the mastery and care that had raised it from fragility to dominance. She could see the intelligence in its eyes, a reflection of its master's own mind, and knew that she faced not a mindless beast, but a partner in strategy and execution whose loyalty was absolutely extended. A hand and the predator crouched at his feet, tilting its head as if seeking permission. She could feel the tension crackling in the air, the unspoken rules of dominance and survival that had been written over days and weeks of careful nurturing. She stepped back, her mind racing, trying to imagine any way to alter the outcome, but every possibility had been foreseen. Every movement accounted for. Jungle held its breath as he advanced slowly, each step a silent declaration of authority. The predator followed effortlessly, its presence a constant reminder of the power that had been cultivated and the inevitability of submission. The princess lowered her gaze, realizing that she had been outmaneuvered not by force alone but by patience, intelligence, and the bond between man and creature. He spoke softly, words carried on the wind, words that promised mercy in exchange for acknowledgement and respect. She nodded slowly, understanding that survival depended not on victory but on recognition. of the hierarchy that had been established. The predator pressed against his leg, a final gesture of loyalty and dominance that sealed the balance of power. The jungle seemed to relax around them, the tension dissipating, the trees swaying gently in approval of the new order. The princess bowed her head, acknowledging the shift, the crown of her pride replaced by the quiet knowledge that true power could be nurtured, forged, and commended in ways she had never anticipated. He stood with the predator at his side, both gazing into the depths of the jungle, knowing that the bond they shared had created a force beyond comparison. The princess would leave the clearing, alive but forever changed, and the jungle would remember the rise of the hunter, the predator, and the master whose patience, cunning, and care had rewritten the rules of survival and dominance. The sun set, casting long shadows over the clearing, the predator's eyes glinting in the fading light, and he understood that their story had only just begun. The jungle, a living witness to the beginning of a reign born from trust, loyalty, and the quiet cultivation of power that could not be challenged nor undone.